Hello there, duelists. Have you ever felt like an archetype just resonates with you? Okay, I'll stop. I've got Resonators on the playmat today. These cheeky little fiends are used by the king from 5Ds himself, Jack Atlas, which never really felt like an archetype until High Speed Raiders in 2015, when they got quite a bit of support. Since then, they've kind of had smatterings of support here and there, and a continual reinvention of Red Dragon Archfiend, Jack Atlas's original boss monster. So let's fire up that dual runner and see how far Resonators can go. Okay, so let's get into the Resonators themselves. So first up, we've got 3 Crimson Resonator. So this guy's the latest Resonator to come out, I believe. He's the best starter that the deck's got, and it's really almost like someone came up with the effect who's a fan of Resonators. You can special summon it if you control no other monsters. That's an activated effect, not an inherent summon condition. And if you can only do it once per turn, and then if it's on the field and you only control a Dark Dragon Synchro monster, you can activate its other effect, which also is a once per turn, and you can special summon 2 Resonator monsters from your deck, which is obviously an incredible way to kind of start the ball rolling. From there, we've got 3 Synkron Resonator. This is also a really, really good Resonator. The others tend not to be quite as versatile, but yeah, Synkron Resonator, not spelled correctly, is amazing. If you control a Synchro monster, you can special summon it from your hand. You can only do that once per turn. However, its other effect isn't once per turn, and if it's sent to the graveyard, you can add a Resonator card from your graveyard back to your hand, which is obviously a really good way of kind of keeping your resources. Quite a lot of the time, you actually end up with too many Resonators in your hand. From there, I'm running a few less than 3 ofs for the Resonator, so I'm running 2 Red Resonator, 1 Creation Resonator, which is a bit battered actually, and 1 Chain Resonator. So, Red Resonator was the one from High Speed Raiders, so if it's normal summoned, you can special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your hand. And when it's special summoned, you can gain life points equal to 1 card on the field. 1 card's on the field attack, which is a really good way of like bumping your life points up massively. Creation Resonator, if you control level 8 or higher Synchro monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, and that isn't actually once per turn. So if you can kind of loop it with Synkron Resonator, you can continually special summon that Creation Resonator, which is pretty good. But it's not really worth running more than 1 because it's just it's a bit dead in hand, and you can kind of fish it out of the deck when you need it. You can also search it by other mechanisms as well. Chain Resonator, if it's normal summoned while a Synchro monster is on the field, you can special summon 1 Resonator monster from your deck, except itself. Chain Resonator is a bit pants, you don't really want to be normal summoning it. You can, the real reason we're running it is because it's a light monster, and it's a good way of fishing out a light monster from the deck, which we need for some of our plays. From there, the non-tuners that we're running are 3 Wandering King Wildwind, which for some reason actually got quite expensive. I didn't really notice that happening, but yeah. So Wandering King Wildwind, you can special summon it if you control a Resonator is basically it, but I think it's a fiend type monster with 1500 or less attack. That's not once per turn, so if you've got multiple, you can do it. You can special summon him out multiple times, and then if he's in the graveyard, except the turn he's sent there, you can banish him to add a Resonator card from your deck to your hand, and again, that's not once per turn. So it's a really solid card. From there, actually, something to mention, I suppose, with Wandering King and Witch of the Black Forest, which we're running 3 of, spoiler alert, is that if you search for Wandering King Wildwind with Witch of the Black Forest, you can special summon it because the special summon is inherent. So we're running 3 Witch of the Black Forest, the nerfed OG monster. So if it's sent from the fields to the graveyard, you can add a monster with 1500 or less defense from your deck to your hand, which is the kind of original effect, but you can't activate cards or effects with that name for the rest of the turn, and you can only use it once per turn. So it's just a decent normal summon, a way of kind of accruing advantage, and you can add. There's quite a lot of cards that you can add, which makes Witch of the Black Forest fairly versatile. And it's actually probably the best normal summon that this deck has to offer. From there, I've kind of gone along the vein of non-tuners that can add me resources. So I've gone with 2 Performage Damage Juggler and 2 Performage Hat Tricker. So you kind of want to see damage Juggler, so that when it's sent to the graveyard, you can banish it to add the Hat Tricker. And it's kind of in the same vein as Witch of the Blast Forest, where you're just kind of accruing resources. Because sometimes you can end up with, yeah, as I said before, like a bunch of Resonators and then kind of nothing to synchro with because you've got no non-tuners. Damage Juggler's also got another effect about negating damage, and Hat Tricker's got another effect other than its special summon if there are 2 monsters on the field, which is the gain tokens and get to 3,300, neither of which are relevant. Hat Tricker maybe comes up occasionally, and so does Damage Juggler, but I'd say it's once in a blue moon. From there, I'm rounding up the non-hand trap monsters with Hop Ear Squadron. So during your opponent's main phase, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls, special summon itself, and then immediately after it's summoned, you synchro summon using the targeted monster and Hop Ear Squadron, which kind of gives you kind of a follow-up play. But obviously playing Red Rising Dragon, which is it gets hand trapped to oblivion. But if you use, for example, Witch of the Black Forest and a Resonator to go to Red Rising Dragon, you can grab Hop Ear Squadron and then synchro in your opponent's turn for something that can actually do something. And then finally, rounding up, we're running hand traps. So we're running 3 Effect Veiler, 3 Psy-Framegear Gamma, and the 1 driver. So I'm focusing on lights because we're running cards that need light and darks in the graveyard, and I wanted to kind of bump up the counts from that. You could definitely run Ash if you wanted to. You could also run Nibiru. I think I wouldn't have any qualms with that. I would recommend Psy-Framegear Gamma just because there's a few cards which, if they get ashed or whatever it is, when you don't have any cards on the field, you're kind of screwed. So Gamma will protect you against your opponent's hand traps, which I think is something that's pretty crux. So, as you probably gathered from the monster section, this spell and trap section is going to be fairly light. So we're running 3 Resonator Call. It's just the rotor for Resonators. Add 1 Resonator monster from your deck to your hand. It's not once per turn, it's just great. Adds consistency to your deck. You really want to see that Crimson Resonator turn 1. Resonator Command is also a reasonably good consistency booster. Why it's a quick play I don't really know, because you're never really waiting to use it on your opponent's turn, but you can discard 1 Resonator monster, add 1 level 4 or lower Fiend type monster from your deck to your hand. Unfortunately, you can only use 1 per turn, but it's still well worth it to add that consistency boost. And the fact that it can add either a tuner or a non-tuner is actually pretty solid in terms of making our hands viable. From there, we're running 3 Pot of Desires. I think you could probably run, I've forgotten what the newest pot's called. Well, Prosperity, there you go, nailed it. You could run that, but if you're playing, a playset of, a $300 playset for a Resonator deck, then, all power to you. But I think that Desires is not a bad replacement in this deck. Obviously, you kind of want to fish out the cards that, you only have a few number of, like the Chain or the Creation Resonator before you resolve the Pot of Desires. But you can work around it if you do end up banishing those things. From there, running the 1 Call by the Grave. The Red Rising Dragon and some of your other, choke points are hideous. So if you get hand trapped, that can almost be the end of the turn. So anything that we can do to prevent your opponent from doing that, we should be playing. And then the 1 Monster Reborn for kind of recovery, and the 1 Upstart Goblin for kind of consistency boosting. These are kind of open slots. You can kind of run whatever you want, really. Okay, and on to the final section, which is the extra deck, which mostly consists of Dark Dragon Synchro monsters, which I'm sure you'll be super surprised to hear. So first up, we're playing 3 Dark Dragon Synchro monsters, which is a Red Rising Dragon. So this is kind of the core of your, plays. It's basically the route in which you go through pretty much everything. So when it's synchro summoned, you can special summon a Resonator monster from your graveyard. When you do that, you can only synchro summon Dark Dragon Synchro monsters for the rest of the turn. When it's in the graveyard, apart from the turn it was sent there, you can banish it, special summon 2 level 1 Resonator monsters from your graveyard. It's a shame that it's level 1 Resonator monsters. I'm not really sure why they needed that clause, but it's actually a really, really solid effect, and I think it's actually massively underrated. From there, we're running 1 Ancient Pixie Dragon, which has got a few effects based on field spells, but it basically never comes up. The real reason we'll run it is because it's a dark dragon synchro monster that's level 7. You could run whatever you want. Sometimes you kind of need that level 5, which I think there's Samsara and a few others as well. I've kind of analysed it to be rare enough that you don't need to run those cards, but occasionally it does come up and you end up missing. From there, I'm running 3 level 8s. So I'm running 1 Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend, 1 Chaos Ruler, and 1 Crystal Wind Synchro Dragon. So Crystal Wind Synchro Dragon is, just your classic negator. You can't summon it on your first turn if you use Red Rising Dragon. You can summon it turns after that if you don't use Red Rising Dragon. And you can also use Hop Ear Squadron to summon it with Red Rising Dragon during your opponent's turn, which is something that I tend to do if I get disrupted. Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend is pretty decent. I think he comes up occasionally, as kind of board wipe because he can destroy all special summon effect monsters your opponent control, or in fact that's on the field, and inflict 500 to your opponent for each. I think, if you fancy mixing this up or even adding more, the classics are kind of like your Void Ogre Dragon and your Beals of Diabolic Dragons, but I find that you don't really need that many more than, these 3. Chaos Ruler is absolutely incredible, so it's got the excavate effect, so you can dig for some of your resonators, mostly Synkron Resonator. And then if he's in the graveyard, you can banish a light or a dark to special summon him back, and he's banished when he leaves the field. And what he does is he just allows you to put material on the board. The fact that you've got to banish a light or a dark is one of the main reasons why we're running the Chain Resonator, because it's light. So sometimes you just need to be able to search that light to dump it in the graveyard in order to special summon back the Chaos Ruler. And he allows you to go to 2 Red Dragon Archfiend Abysses in your opening turn. So if you've got a Crimson Resonator and a Witch of the Black Forest, that allows you to go to 2 Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abysses, which is a super solid. Abyss has got this classic effect where it can negate a face-up card on the field, which isn't once per turn. Then it's got a once per turn effect, which if it inflicts battle damage, you can special summon a Resonator monster from your graveyard in defense position. Again, I'm not really sure why the special summon effect was decreed to be too busted to be once per turn. Level 10s, we're running Bane, Tyrant Red Dragon Archfiend, and Satellite Warrior. So again, Satellite Warrior has got to be on your subsequent turns or during your opponent's turn with Hop Ear Squadron. Tyrant Red Dragon Archfiend is 2 tuners. Is that double synchro summoning? I can't really remember what it's called in the anime. Anyway, so it must be synchro summoned, and you can use each of the effects once per turn. So you can negate something, you can negate a spell or trap, so to say, and it's in the battle phase. So it's just like, what is going on? Why have you made that so restrictive? He gains 500 attack if he does that, obviously. But the main effect that you're using is during your main phase, you can destroy all of the cards on the field, and for the rest of the turn, he can only attack. And then Bane is, I don't know, I suppose he's an easy laddering, so he only requires 1 tuner and 1 dark dragon synchro monster. He can tribute a monster, special summon back a Archfiend monster, so he's not bad in terms of keeping bodies and resources on the field. He's also got that kind of battle effect special summoning clause that Abyss has. So if he inflicts battle damage, you can special summon a Resonator from your deck and from your graveyard, but they've got to be the same level. And then finally, we've got 3 level 12s, which I think is probably too many, but I just can't bring myself to cut one. So we've got Geomathmech Final Sigma, we've got Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity, and we've got the Red Supernova Dragon, which was the most recent card that came out kind of for this deck, which goes from the past. So, Geomathmech Final Sigma, if it's in the main monster zone, it's unaffected by your opponent, by card effects apart from Mathmech cards, which obviously we're not running, so we can't affect it either. It also inflicts double battle damage. So it can be just a bit of a wall and a bit difficult for your opponent to get around, especially if they've had to kind of disrupt other things in order to stop other plays in your deck. So it's, again, it's more like a, a turn 3 jobby. King Calamity is, again, I was running some stuff in order to be able to summon him on, my opponent's turn. So, Synchro Transmission and Synchro Call are both options for the deck, along with like Trap Trick and stuff like that. But I just found it's just not actually that good, and it just adds inconsistency and it makes your deck slower. I get why people are doing it, because King Calamity, basically stops your opponent's turn, but I just don't think it's worth. I don't think it's worth the trade-off. So King Calamity, when it's summoned, you can stop your opponent activating cards, and also their cards can't be activated. And that can't be negated. It also, if it inflicts battle damage, if it destroys a monster, you inflict effect damage equal to the monster's that was destroyed's attack points. I absolutely crucified that, but whatever, we're sticking with it. So again, he's kind of like, you know, you're going into that turn 3 to try and stop your opponent from doing anything to disrupt you and seal the game there and then. I don't think he comes up as much as I'd kind of like him to. And in fact, Supernova Dragon is in the same boat. I think he's just a bit too tricky to summon. So King Calamity is 2 tuners, whereas Supernova Dragon is 3, and that's just a bit too bleh. So he can't be destroyed by opponent's card effects. He gains 500 attack for each tuner, which can make him absolutely monstrous because he starts at 4,000, so you can easily get this guy to like 7,000 sort of fields, which makes him a big boy. Also, if your opponent activates effects, you can banish himself and all cards your opponent controls, which is not bad, but it doesn't negate the effect. And then he only comes back during your next end phase, which is like, summon this big dragon back. I'm not going to be able to use it on my turn. So he's got his ups and downs. Still, you can definitely, you know, if you've got a reasonable opening hand, you can get to Supernova Dragon and an Abyss. So, you know, that's not a bad setup. It would be silly to discuss Resonators and not mention Duel Links. Resonators are one of the best, if not the best deck right now. My build, as you can see, is fairly standard in its core. The 3 Crimson, the 3 Wandering King, 3 Resonator Call, etc. I'm running Sphere Crebo and Goblin of Greed in place of Doom Caliber Knight, as I'm just can't justify going through a box just for Doom Caliber Knight, although it's definitely the best way to play it in my opinion. I'm also opting for Heavy Trunade rather than the Treacherous Trap Hole, as I don't have the Book of Moon to kind of get out of the way for the Treacherous Trap Hole. So I'm opting for Raigeki Break and the Solemn package. I'm also in the extra deck playing the 1 OG Red Dragon Archfiend and 1 Bane to bring it out, which is a little high roll, but it's worked out so far. So the deck is very solid, mostly due to that skill. Demon's Resonance is absolutely busted. You know, being able to reveal a Resonator, to add a Fiend is absolutely insane and really adds a huge level of consistency to the deck. I think the deck's a weird one in terms of a lot of the cards are free to play, but then you have got to scrape through a lot of boxes in order to get the kind of pieces. Like, why Bane and Red Resonator are in different boxes is beyond me. I reckon you have to go through 7 mini boxes and 1 main deck box in order to get all this stuff. So a worst case scenario, that's kind of like 8,500 gems, which is quite considerable. But it is very powerful, so I suppose it's a lot better than some of the other, you know, it's still reasonably budget is what I'm trying to say. I actually really like the fact that the deck core for Resonators is the same for Duel Links and TCG. It really makes it feel a coherent deck. Okay, so let's conclude. Resonators can put up a decent first turn field, but they are very susceptible to hand traps and have massive and obvious choke points. It's not even really like Rogue where you can put up an unbeatable board if you get, you know, undisrupted. Some decks will just be able to chew through the negates that you put up and then you're kind of toast. So unfortunately it's a 2 for relevance. The deck is fairly linear in its kind of opening combos, but they really do branch out once you get to kind of the end sections. And there really isn't a prescribed build, which is nice. Also, smacking the opponent with huge dragons is always fun. So it's a biased 4 for fun factor. The deck is fairly budget. I've estimated this at about $180 from TCG Player, and you can definitely kind of trim the edges down if you kind of want a cheaper version of this. All said, this deck is no king, but it's a great deck for someone, you know, maybe getting into the game or just someone who's just gonna go play casually at locals. Thanks for watching and check out the channel for other videos.